I'd like to begin by explaining very carefully exactly what I mean when I say religious right, so that we don't have any misunderstandings amongst us. The term religious right, or radical right as it is alternatively called, means, and exactly what it doesn't mean is equally important. The term is best understood as a social and political movement which seeks to impose their fundamentalist religious beliefs on everyone by means of influencing mainstream thought and overtaking mainstream institutions such as the media, public education, and government. In the United States, the term particularly implicates fundamentalist Christians, but it is important for us to keep in mind that the negative connotation which we ascribe to the term religious right must not be ascribed to Christians generally, as the majority of Christians, including many evangelical Christians, abhor the agenda and the tactics of the religious right. And there are many Christians whose religious beliefs inspire them to join in the struggle to protect the very same civil liberties that the religious right seeks to quash. Can you still hear me back there? Okay. It is important for us to keep in mind also that not all members of the religious right are Christian. There is an emerging alliance between what is often thought of as the Christian right and some conservative Jews, notably Rabbi Daniel Lapin, Don Feder, Dennis Prager, and Michael Medved. Some people use the term religious right interchangeably with the term radical right. Others, aware of a poll taken by the Human Rights Campaign Fund, which demonstrated that the average American responds relatively favorably to the term religious right, but has a negative reaction to the term radical right, conscientiously use the term radical right. You'll find that I consistently use the term religious right, and I do so for some very specific reasons. First, I think it is important for us to keep at the forefront of our thoughts that the religious right claims divine authority to engage in their oppressive and often violent activities. And secondly, in a follow-up survey to the one conducted by the Human Rights Campaign Fund, People for the American Way found that while it is true that people do react more negatively to the term radical right than to the term religious right, their concept of radical right includes groups like neo-Nazis and skinheads, not groups like the Christian Coalition and Operation Rescue. Once they understand that the term religious right includes those groups, most Americans respond negatively to that term also. The rise in the Christian patriot and militia movements, which I will talk a little bit about tonight, of course, represent a clear confluence between the radical, that is, the racist and anti-Semitic, and the religious right. However, I think it is of utmost importance that we not allow the increased public scrutiny of Christian patriot and militia groups to have the effect of reframing the image of groups like the Christian Coalition as being moderate. The social policy of groups like the Christian Coalition and other anti-abortion and anti-gay lesbian rights groups is in the long run far more deadly than the recent tragic bombing in Oklahoma City. The goal of the religious right has been succinctly stated by Randall Terry, the founder of Operation Rescue. He says, "Our goal is a Christian nation because the only alternative is a pagan nation. God demands that his law be imposed on unbelievers." In case Terry's statement is ambiguous to any of you, the religious right organization Coalition on Revival states that we deny that anyone, Jew or Gentile, believer or unbeliever, private person or public official, is exempt from the moral obligation before God to submit to Christ's lordship in every aspect of life, in thought, word, and deed. The religious right seeks to eliminate our constitutional democracy and replace it with a theocracy, that is, a government whose civil and criminal laws are based on their interpretation of the Bible. Their agenda includes outlawing abortion without exception and eliminating access to contraception, outlawing homosexuality, parochializing public education, and censoring the arts and other cultural outlets. As the means to the end of remaking this country according to their interpretation of the Bible, the religious right seeks to institute policies which are clearly hostile to women, gays and lesbians, and persons of diverse racial, religious, and cultural backgrounds. Above all, they are working in every venue: political, cultural, legal, and educational. And underground, they are engaging in a campaign of domestic terrorism aimed at doctors who perform abortions, environmentalists, and civil rights activists. The political strategy of the religious right has evolved over the last few years. They are remaking the Republican Party in their own image, and instead of seeking power exclusively from the White House down, they are building a sound political infrastructure by seeking widespread election to local and state, as well as national office. Election to even local office provides a springboard of credibility for later election to higher office, and meanwhile carries with it the opportunity to make numerous appointments to like-minded individuals who will in turn run for elective office at a later date. Stealth is an avowed strategy of the religious right in seeking election to local school boards. Candidates deliberately conceal their fundamentalist religious orientation from the public, or acknowledge their religious orientation but vehemently disavow any intention of implementing any aspect of the religious right agenda, right up until the day after they're elected. Thanks to the work of groups like People for the American Way, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, the Institute for the Study of the Religious Right, and others who are working to identify and expose religious right candidates, stealth is becoming an increasingly less viable strategy. But it hasn't died yet. Congresswoman Andrea Seastrand of California, who is adamantly anti-abortion and has a long history of anti-abortion activism, won election in a district that is 70% pro-choice. By employing such stealth strategies as avoiding public forums and debates where her anti-abortion position would be visibly exposed. In the cultural arena, realizing the power of culture to influence politics, the religious right seeks to censor expression of values and ideas which do not directly support their religious beliefs or political agenda, be those ideas expressed in television, film, music, literature, academia, or the fine or performing arts, or in the use of the language itself. As well as having mastered the art of manipulating the secular media and other mainstream cultural outlets to its advantage, the religious right has also established its own cultural venues, such as Christian radio and television. In the educational arena, the religious right seeks control of our schools because, as they say, whoever controls the minds of children controls the Western world. The religious right is highly involved in influencing public education, and they are trying to eviscerate sex education, AIDS prevention education, bilingual education, and multicultural educational programs, which teach respect for, instead of fear of, diversity. They're attempting to institute fear and shame-based abstinence-only programs, textbook censorship, school prayer, and the teaching of creationism in the schools. Finally, they seek to instill bigotry towards lesbians and gays, which amounts to teaching self-loathing to lesbian and gay youth, among whom the suicide rate is already alarmingly high. And they seek to eliminate school breakfast programs for underprivileged pupils on the theory that such programs somehow undermine the family. Unlike the religious right, progressive organizations will realize their mandates in the long term, not if they can control the minds of children, but rather if children have the freedom to learn to think critically for themselves. Religious right attacks on the rights of gays and lesbians are evident in their efforts to defeat partnership laws and in numerous statewide referendum campaigns to deny lesbian and gays such basic civil liberties as the rights not to be discriminated against in employment or housing. The religious right wants schools to teach children that homosexuality is immoral and sick. It also attempts, often successfully, to censor television shows, movies, books, art, and music which deal with gay themes in other than a condemnatory manner. The American Family Association blasts any TV show or episode that presents homosexuality as a normal, acceptable alternative lifestyle. For example, the American Family Association targeted a Melrose Place episode in which a homosexual character was portrayed as compassionate toward another character who was paralyzed in an auto accident. They encouraged members to bombard the advertisers with letters and phone calls to demand that they stop sponsoring television programs which are, quote, pushing the homosexual agenda. The religious right attacks on women's reproductive rights and sponsoring legislation to repeal abortion rights and deny funding for abortion to poor women. They have engaged in terrorism at women's clinics, harassing patients and staff, forming violent blockades, vandalizing clinics, and even murdering doctors who perform abortions. They denounce contraception with nearly as much fervor as they denounce abortion. It is ironic that people like Randall Terry, who claim that a key element in the alleged moral decline in this country is people's refusal to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions, refuses to take any personal responsibility for the escalation in the murder of doctors, when he goes around demanding of his followers, the most fanatical of anti-abortion activists, if you think abortion is murder, then act like it's murder. The religious right also fuels the fires of racism and anti-Semitism and is largely responsible for the current climate of xenophobia and anti-immigration hysteria which pervades the United States right now. Examples of anti-Semitic, racist, and xenophobic statements made by religious right leaders include those contained in an article written by Phyllis Schlafly in the Christian American, the publication of the Christian Coalition, wherein she laments that the percentage of Americans who are white is rapidly declining due to the surge of immigration from the Third World. Phyllis Schlafly, as you may know, is the founder of the Eagle Forum, another religious right organization whose main focus is defeating state and federal initiatives which seek equal rights for women. Then, of course, there's Rush Limbaugh, who has a radio listening audience estimated by Arbitron to be 20 million people, and a TV viewing audience estimated at between 5 and 7 million. Limbaugh says, "Let stupid and unskilled Mexicans do the kinds of jobs that take absolutely no knowledge." And Pat Robertson, who says that the blacks in South Africa don't have it all that bad, and that a one-man, one-vote policy in South Africa is not a good idea. Pat Robertson also informs us that the minute you turn the United States Constitution over to the hands of non-Christian people and atheists, they can use it to destroy the very foundations of society. Then there's Father Paul Marx, who founded the religious right group Human Life International, and who was the director of that organization for the past 13 years. Who authored a book propounding his views on the immorality of abortion, in which he points out how many Jews are leaders in the abortion rights community, or doctors who provide abortions. I could go on, but it should be clear from these examples of overt anti-Semitism and racism among the leadership of the religious right, why such organizations provide a ready pool of potential Christian patriot and militia members. The overlap, particularly of the anti-abortion element of the religious right and the militia membership, was clearly evident at a recent meeting of the U.S. Taxpayers Party. Last year's Taxpayers Party convention featured two of the country's best-known anti-abortion leaders, Randall Terry of Operation Rescue and Matthew Truella of Milwaukee's Missionaries to the Preborn. Truella has organized paramilitary training sessions for his church members, and in his speech at the convention, he referred proudly to his infant son's ability to accurately indicate his trigger finger, along with his other body parts. Attendees of the conference were offered the manual, Principles Justifying the Arming and Organizing of a Militia, in which the Bible was invoked to justify the formation of assault teams to protect the unborn. And Tom Metzger, the leader of the white Aryan resistance here in California, has said, almost all abortion doctors are Jews. Abortion makes money for Jews. Almost all abortion nurses are lesbians. Abortion gives thrills to lesbians. Abortion is promoted by the corrupt Jewish organization Planned Parenthood. Jews must be punished for this Holocaust and murder of white children, along with their perverted lesbian nurses. And the KKK calls legalized abortion the Jewish-engineered murder of white babies. At virtually every religious right conference I've attended, I've heard circulate the same paranoid reasoning as that which drives the militias, namely that there is a sinister global conspiracy controlling the United States government, or some global conspiracy in which key political and economic events are manipulated by a small group of elite insiders. But I want to go back for a minute to what I said before. The increased attention which is now being paid to militia and Christian patriot activity must not be allowed to have the effect of desensitizing us to the above-ground activities of well-known religious right organizations. The extreme danger posed by the religious right lies in the fact that it is a highly organized and well-financed social movement and political machine with a built-in organizing base of thousands of churches as well as religious radio and television broadcasters. It is comprised of such organizations as James Dobson's Focus on the Family, which commands an annual budget of $150 million, employs 1,200 people, and broadcasts on over 1,550 radio stations worldwide. Working both individually and in coalition with other religious right organizations, Focus on the Family has been a key organizer of anti-gay and lesbian and anti-public education school voucher campaigns around the country. Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition, with an annual budget of $12 million and with a membership of rapidly approaching 2 million people. Its newspaper, The Christian American, has a circulation of 450,000. Pat Robertson is also the president of the 700 Club, which is broadcast all over the United States on cable and local syndicated stations and in numerous languages worldwide. The Christian Coalition is committed to a religious right takeover not only of school boards, but of the political apparatus of the Republican Party. And we certainly have seen how in the last 2 years they've made some significant strides. Then there's Beverly LaHaye's Concerned Women for America, which boasts an annual budget of $10 million and a national membership approaching 600,000. Beverly LaHaye hosts a radio program heard 5 times per week on more than 60 Christian stations. Her listening audience is estimated at about 500,000. Concerned Women for America actively opposes abortion, homosexuality, and state equal rights amendments. Donald Wildman's American Family Association's annual budget is $6 million and its national membership is 450,000. Wildman is dedicated to censoring television, music, and the fine and performing arts. He is the driving force behind efforts to eliminate funding for the National Endowment for the Arts. Lastly, there's Robert Simon's National Association of Christian Educators and Citizens for Excellence in Education. Don't let the names fool you. On an annual budget of $700,000, Simons hosts a weekly radio program heard on 76 Christian radio stations, and his goal is religious right control of every school board in the country. you can see that whether you think about and talk about this movement as the radical right or the religious right or just plain fascism, the important thing is that you not just think about it and talk about it, but that you do something. Remain informed, inform those you come into contact with, help get out the vote, vote yourselves, work on the campaigns of progressive candidates who will work to defeat the agendas of the religious right, and support with both your time and your money groups who work to expose and defeat the religious right. Groups like the one that many of you are members of and that you're here on behalf of this evening. Now I'd like to take some time to address any comments that any of you have or answer any questions. Very often some of the most profound information and insights come from people in the audience who have had personal experiences or have opinions of their own on this subject. The question is that I have mentioned stealth candidates, particularly for local entity elections, such as school boards, and is there some list, is there some national organization which is doing this research and maintaining some list that you can call and get the names of who you should not vote for? And the answer is emphatically no. The only way for you as members of your community to fight this fight is to be monitoring community-based religious right activity yourself. It's all of our fantasy that there ever could be some national organization that can do it all for us. That is not the way it is. It's not the way it ever can be. So I would encourage all of you to find out when your local school board meetings are and to personally attend as many of those as you can, or to have friends who do. Make sure that somebody in your circle is covering those meetings and monitoring what is being said there and then spreading the word. And when there is a religious right candidate, that you force that person into the public light. You need to ask the hard-hitting questions. Well, what do you think about providing free breakfast for children whose parents can't afford to feed them in the morning? Or what do you think about sexuality education in the schools? What sort of programs should we have, if any? You need to force those people into the public light. And if you are aware that there are candidates who are, in fact, avoiding any kind of public forum, you need to take the responsibility for alerting not only your friends and your neighbor, but the media. Find media contacts whose job it will be to ferret those people out and expose them publicly in the newspapers. The question was, has there been an investigation of Promise Keepers? And the answer is that several of us, and I imagine that Americans United is one of the organizations that is monitoring that, but Promise Keepers comes under the roof of James Dobson's Focus on the Family, although that is not widely known. And there's a great deal of concern, and I would urge that we all be concerned about this, because what I believe is going on, and what many of us that follow this sort of activity on a daily basis think is going on, is that the religious right is gathering thousands and thousands of men together. And they're doing it under the auspices of, helping them strengthen their marital relationships, etc. But once they have them in there, they are got them on the mailing list, and they start with the phone calls and the letters, etc., trying to suck them into the entire agenda of the religious right. And they are apparently an extremely committed and devout and needy group of men who I think could very easily really carry on this battle and become part of this battle with the religious right. That's a very good question. Is there anybody in this room who has ever attended one of those meetings to sort of see what's going on? Okay. Yes? Right. The question is that there was an article in the LA Times recently that mentioned that of the 72,000 men who were there, women were not allowed. And if they're trying to strengthen the marital relationship, how can they do that with just part of the couple there? It's a good question. And I think it really points up to the fact that they're not trying to strengthen a marital relationship. my concern always, and I think I'm not a psychologist and I don't pretend to be one, but I think that there is a personality type that is extremely driven to these sorts of movements, and I think that they've really tapped into a group of, the notion behind Promise Keepers supposedly is to help these men not to stray on their wives and to keep their promises, including their marital vows. And my concern is that they have tapped into a group of men who don't feel that they have the internal resources or the internal mechanisms to control themselves, so they are looking for an external form of control. And that's an inch away from mind control. The question is, isn't there a point to take control of the family as the patriarch? And we all need to keep in mind that men who are fundamentalist Christians, who are a part of this movement, are already doing that in their relationships and in their families. I think that this is perhaps a movement that is meant to counter any social sense that this isn't a good thing, what they do.